Hi there, my name is Christopher Scott. Thanks for joining me for another Basics of the Bible video. In these series of videos, we go Genesis through Revelation, looking at what are the basics of these books and what are the basic stories, elements of the Bible. So there's a playlist link down there in the description for all 75 videos, part of this series. You're welcome to watch for free, provided here on video. All the information's for free, and I am grateful to get to share with you. Today we're looking at the book of 2 Kings. 2 Kings. And 2 Kings is part of, before we talk about 2 Kings, 2 Kings is part of the historical books. So in the Bible, there are 39 books in the Old Testament. There are 27 in the New Testament. Out of those 39 books in the Old Testament, there are 5 books of Moses, we call the Pentateuch or the Torah, and then there are 12 historical books, and 2 Kings is one of those 12 historical books. And by historical books, they are telling history, mostly chronological. It kind of shifts back and forth a couple times, but it is history with a story that it wants to tell, a specific point of view it wants to portray, and a specific intent that it has for what it is saying. So let's look at the book of 2 Kings today together. The one-word description I have for 2 Kings is leaving. Leaving. 1 Kings was about dividing. I have a link to 1 Kings up there in the ID cards. 1 Kings was about dividing, how Solomon's son Rehoboam divided the kingdom to Israel in the north and Judah in the south, based on his decisions. And then 2 Kings is about leaving, because the people in the north, they leave to Assyria, and the people in the south, they leave to Babylon. They get conquered. Each of them gets conquered. So that's why I have that one-word description, leaving. At the end of 2 Kings, we see the fall of Genesis 3 in its most transparent form. For thousands of years, the nation of Israel has tried to be obedient to God and tried to keep his law, yet they have proved over and over again that they cannot do it. They cannot do it. Okay? And so 2 Kings is about leaving. The author, we do not know who the author is, but it probably was someone in exile. So in 586 BC, the nation of Babylon completely demolishes Jerusalem, levels the city and the temple, takes everybody back to Babylon, and it's probably someone in Babylon at about 550 BC, roughly, that writes the book of 2 Kings, describing what happened and why they were conquered and taken away. The dates of the book, the dates that are covered in this book are 583 BC. I'm sorry, they're 853 BC. I got the numbers mixed up. 853 BC to 586 BC. So that period of time there, that's 270 years that it's talking about. And there are 2 key verses that I've chosen for this verse. One for Israel in the north and one for Judah in the south. So 2 Kings 17:23 is the first key verse that I want to read to you. I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible, from my Ryrie study Bible here. So 2 Kings 17:23 says, "Until the Lord removed Israel from his sight, as he spoke through all his servants the prophets. So Israel was carried away into exile from their own land to Assyria until this day." So that verse talks about how Israel in the north, those 10 tribes in the north, which we call Israel, their capital city was Samaria, are conquered by Assyria in 722 BC and taken away to Assyria, and they pretty much disappear. We don't learn much more about them throughout the rest of the Bible. That's what that verse is saying, is that God had sent these prophets to prophesy to Israel, you need to turn back to God, you're doing things wrong, and if you don't, God will send a foreign nation to conquer you. The prophets of Amos and Hosea both gave that message. Amos and Hosea both told Israel in the north, you need to turn back to God, otherwise you will be conquered by a foreign nation. And that's what happens in 2 Kings chapter 17:23. And then in 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 3, the same thing happens to Judah. So 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 3 says, Surely the command of the Lord, surely at the command of the Lord it came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all he had done. So during this time in Judah in the south, God sends prophets to tell Judah and to all these bad kings. He tells them, you need to turn back to God. You need to stop worshiping false idols and gods in your land. Focus on the one true God. Be obedient to him. God sends Obadiah, Joel, Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zepheniah, and Jeremiah are all prophets God sends to Judah in the south, telling them they need to turn back to God. Okay? How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different prophets over about, I think, almost 200 years. Those guys did ministry almost 200 years. A lot of them overlapped, telling the nation of Judah in the south that if they did not stay obedient to God, God was going to send a foreign nation to conquer them. And that happens starting in 605 BC. King Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon sends his armies, and they conquer Jerusalem. And then Jerusalem, the people in Judah and Jerusalem, still aren't obeying and doing what they're supposed to do to Babylon. So he sends another wave of people that come in 597 BC, and they conquer them again. Then 11 years later, the people in Judah still are not doing what Babylon wants them to do. They're still not obeying. They never obeyed God, so why would they obey the nation that rules them? So King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon sends an army again in 586, and he just levels the city and the temple and takes everybody back to Babylon. And that's what happens here in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 3, talks about them leaving to go back. Not a very encouraging book is 2 Kings about how they are leaving. And I want you to notice in each of those verses I read to you, the king is pointed out as the one that didn't keep Israel obedient to God. So when God gave the law in the book of Exodus, I'll put a link up there to my introduction to Exodus video. When God gave the law in the book of Exodus, he gave it to make Israel unique and distinct and separate. And then there are 4 groups of people that tried to get Israel to follow that law, to be unique and distinct and separate. There were priests, there were judges, there were kings, and then eventually prophets. And we see here that those kings are the ones that led Israel away. The king is specifically mentioned in those verses that I read to you. So it's the kings that turned Israel away from God. There's a few outlines I want to give you for this book. The outline I came up with is that the first 17 chapters of this book are about the divided and declining kingdoms of Judah and Israel. First 17 chapters are mostly about the divided kingdoms and the declining kingdoms of Judah and Israel. And then chapters 18 through 25 are about the surviving and struggling kingdom of Judah. So as Israel in the north gets conquered in 722 BC, so that's chapters 1 through 17, and then Judah in the south doesn't get conquered by Babylon until 586. So that's why chapters 18 through 25 continue, because Judah is still surviving. In Charles Ryrie's study Bible that I love to use, has some great notes. He provides a contrast between 1 Kings and 2 Kings that I really like. And I want to share some of that with you that I'm taking from his study Bible. It's a great study Bible. I have a link down there in the description if you wanted to purchase it. It is an affiliate link, so if you click on the link and purchase something, I get a small commission. So I just want to let you know. But it is a Bible I have purchased and I use, and would love to have you use it as well. So 1 Kings begins with King David. 2 Kings ends with the king of Babylon. 1 Kings opens with Solomon's glory. 2 Kings closes with King Jehoiakim's shame. 1 Kings begins with the blessings of obedience. 2 Kings ends with the curse of disobedience. 1 Kings opens with the building of the temple. 2 Kings closes with the burning of the temple. 1 Kings traces the progress of apostasy. 2 Kings describes the consequences of apostasy. 1 Kings shows how kings failed to rule God's people. 2 Kings depicts consequences of that failure. 1 Kings introduces the prophet Elijah. 2 Kings introduces the prophet Elisha. 1 Kings emphasizes the patience of the Lord. 2 Kings confirms the Lord's sure punishment of sin. So that's from page 437 of Ryrie's Study Bible. So that's the book of 2 Kings. It's about leaving. Israel in the north leaves to go to Assyria. Judah in the south leaves to go to Babylon. Okay, and so the next video in our series we're going to look at is 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and that starts the story over again. So pretty much from Genesis to 2nd Kings is mostly chronological. There's a couple periods in there, like with Ruth, where it goes backwards in time a little bit, but from Genesis to 2nd Kings, it's pretty much a straight line of history. So that's helpful for you as you're reading the Bible and understanding it. But when we start 1st Chronicles, that history starts over again and goes backwards. So I hope this video was helpful for you and that you got to learn a little bit more about 2nd Kings and the history of the nation of Israel and Judah and how things operated in the Old Testament. If you found this video helpful, I'd love to have you subscribe to my monthly email newsletter. There's a link down there in the first comment where you can click on that link and subscribe. Every month, I promise, I only send you one email per month. And in that email, I give you links to the newest articles that I've written that previous month. And then I also give you links to the newest YouTube videos that I put out here on YouTube for free. So it's all free information you get by email just once a month. Thanks for watching. I hope to catch you again soon on another video.